They say the smallest details reveal the biggest secrets, and that couldn't be truer inside the walls of Buckingham Palace. It began with a simple necklace around Princess Kate's neck, a dazzling piece that caught every eye in the room. But for one royal guard standing silently nearby, it wasn't a sparkle that froze him. It was a message hidden within it. What followed wasn't just a quiet exchange of royal glances. It was a moment that exposed the truth about Queen Camilla's intentions and changed the mood of the entire palace in seconds. If you're fascinated by the unseen moments behind royal doors, the whispers, the glances, the unspoken power plays, then you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video to stay updated on every twist inside the royal circle. Let's uncover the moment that had the royal guard holding his breath and left everyone questioning what really goes on behind those palace gates. It was supposed to be a day of quiet elegance, the kind of royal afternoon where every gesture is rehearsed, every smile timed to perfection. Inside Windsor Castle's Grand Hall, chandeliers glittered like frozen rain. The air smelled faintly of roses and polished oak. Guests spoke in low, careful tones, their laughter soft and royal approved. But among all that perfection, one small thing was about to disrupt the balance. A necklace. Princess Catherine, radiant as always, entered the room beside Prince William. She wore a gown the color of dawn, soft and pure. Around her neck hung a piece that shimmered with quiet fire, a necklace few had ever seen before. At first glance, it looked simple, a delicate chain, a single gem glowing like a captured tear. But there was something about it, something almost symbolic. It wasn't just jewelry. It was a statement, and one person in that glittering hall noticed it instantly. Queen Camilla. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. It wasn't anger, not yet, more like the sting of recognition. Because Camilla knew exactly where that necklace came from, and why its appearance tonight was a message Kate hadn't needed to speak aloud. From the far corner of the hall, one of the royal guards, a man known for his silence and precision, stood at attention. His name was Thomas. He wasn't supposed to look, wasn't supposed to react. But he saw it all. Camilla's glance, William's subtle nod toward Kate, and the way conversation seemed to pause, just slightly, around them. The atmosphere shifted. The music played on, but something invisible hung in the air. Tension, pride, maybe even defiance. Camilla lifted her glass of champagne, her ring catching the light like a blade. "A lovely piece," she murmured to the Duchess of Kent beside her. "Though rather old-fashioned, wouldn't you say?" The Duchess smiled politely, unaware of the undercurrent. "Oh, I think it's timeless." Timeless. Yes, and that was the point. The necklace wasn't new. It had once belonged to someone whose name still whispered through royal halls. Princess Diana. The crowd didn't know that, but Camilla did, and in that instant her expression faltered. Thomas, the guard, caught the flicker in her eyes, a brief flash of discomfort, quickly masked with a polished smile. To most, it meant nothing. To him, it meant everything. He had stood watch long enough to understand that in this world of crowns and protocol, emotions rarely spoke. But symbols did, and this necklace was screaming something only those who remembered the past could hear. Kate, for her part, carried herself with effortless calm. She didn't fidget or flaunt the piece. She simply wore it, gracefully, deliberately, as though it were a quiet tribute. William's glance at her was brief, but full of meaning. He didn't need to say it. His mother's legacy was alive, right there in the ballroom. Camilla's fingers tightened slightly on her glass. For a moment, her carefully built poise wavered. The guard noticed her knuckles whiten, then relax. A moment later, she was smiling again, but it felt forced. The kind of smile that hides thunder behind clouds. "Excuse me," she said softly, setting down her drink. "I believe I need a word with the Princess of Wales." Thomas's breath caught. That wasn't on the schedule. Royals didn't just have words during public receptions. But Camilla was already gliding toward Kate, her heels echoing like whispers against marble. When she reached her, the room seemed to fade. The two women exchanged a sort of greeting that looks polite to outsiders but hums with meaning underneath. Their words were quiet, too quiet for most ears, but not for Thomas. Years of standing still had trained him to notice every flicker sound. "Lovely necklace," Camilla said smoothly. "I don't recall seeing it in the royal collection lately." Kate's eyes met hers, calm, unflinching. "It was a gift," she said softly. "From William." A pause. Camilla tilted her head. "Ah, sentimental then." Kate smiled. "History tends to be."
And that was it. Polite words spoken like glass, clinking on glass. But the meaning behind them was sharp enough to cut. Because both women knew exactly whose history that necklace carried. It was more than an accessory. It was a memory, one that Camilla had tried to bury under years of silence and ceremony. The guard swallowed hard, his pulse quickening. He shouldn't have been listening. He shouldn't even have cared. But in that moment, it didn't feel like gossip. It felt like witnessing a chapter of history being written, one of those moments the public would never see, but that changed everything behind closed doors. As the evening went on, the tension slowly cooled. The orchestra swelled, and conversation flowed once more. Camilla retreated to her usual circle, all smiles and laughter, but something about her demeanor had shifted, brittle, uncertain. Kate, meanwhile, remained composed, radiant. She didn't seek attention. It found her. Later that night, as the guests departed, Thomas stood at the grand entrance. He watched as Kate and William left together, their silhouettes framed by the castle lights. And for a fleeting moment, Kate turned, her eyes meeting his. There was warmth there. Gratitude, perhaps. Or maybe she simply understood that sometimes even the silent deserve to see the truth. As her car disappeared into the royal drive, Thomas exhaled. He'd seen many royal evenings, many smiles that meant nothing. But tonight was different. Tonight, he'd seen power take a quiet, graceful shape. And in his heart, he knew one thing for certain. That necklace wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a message, and Camilla had received it, loud and clear. But what Thomas didn't know was that the night's events had only just begun. That small act of remembrance would stir echoes deeper than anyone expected. And soon, even the royal guard would find himself caught between loyalty and truth. The next morning, the palace corridors were quieter than usual. That strange, uneasy kind of quiet that comes after a storm that no one admits happened. Thomas marched through the east corridor, boots echoing faintly against the polished floor. He'd been on duty for nearly 10 years, long enough to recognize when something wasn't right. Normally, post-event mornings were full of routine chatter. The butlers joking about late guests, the secretaries hustling with lists, the chefs arguing over breakfast menus. But today there was nothing, just a faint ticking of the grandfather clock and whispers that stopped the moment he passed. He tried to shake it off. Guards weren't meant to wonder. Guards were meant to guard, to stand tall, keep their eyes forward and their thoughts buried. But ever since the moment he saw Camilla's reaction to Kate's necklace, something inside him wouldn't settle. Maybe it was the way Camilla had looked, not shocked exactly, but exposed. Or maybe it was the faint tremor in her voice when she'd said, "lovely necklace." For a woman who prided herself on control, it had been a rare crack in her royal armor. And Thomas, a man trained to notice cracks, couldn't unsee it. By noon, whispers had turned into half-sentences. Palace aides moved briskly, carrying folders they didn't usually carry. The Queen's private secretary had called an unscheduled meeting. And yet, through all the polished composure, something invisible hung in the air, like dust that catches light only when you look closely enough. In the guards' quarters, Thomas removed his gloves and leaned against the window. The rain had started again, soft against the glass. He thought about the necklace, the way it glimmered like memory itself. Why would it unsettle someone like Queen Camilla? It wasn't scandalous. It wasn't political. It was personal. He didn't mean to care, but somehow he did. Maybe because he'd served long enough to see how fragile even the grandest lives could be. Maybe because once before all this, he'd lost someone too, someone whose memory he carried like a keepsake he couldn't wear. And so, when he saw Kate pass by later that afternoon, her steps measured, her smile faint but real, he couldn't help but feel a quiet respect. She didn't wear the necklace today, but she didn't need to. Its meaning lingered in the air, like a song that refused to fade. "Thomas," came a voice from behind him. He turned sharply. It was Colonel Reeves, head of royal security, a man of discipline, silver-haired, and feared for his precision. Her Majesty requests that all guards assigned to last night's event submit a full report by the evening. Every detail, every movement. Yes, sir. Reeves studied him for a moment longer. And, Thomas, make sure your report is factual. No speculation. You understand me. Of course, sir. But the tone wasn't casual. It carried warning, or maybe fear. And that was strange. What could a simple necklace have stirred that required this level of scrutiny? That night, Thomas sat at his small desk, pen poised over the report sheet. He could have written it in 10 minutes. All guests entered. All security measures maintained. No breaches. But his hand hovered. His mind replayed every moment. The glance, the whisper, the tightening of Camilla's jaw. He wasn't imagining it. Something had shifted. And then he heard it. Footsteps outside. Hushed voices in the corridor. His Majesty doesn't want this discussed further, said one voice. Female, refined, familiar. Camilla. Thomas froze, listening. It was inappropriate, she continued sharply. Displaying that piece at a state reception? Unnecessary. William should have known better. A second voice, calmer, male, answered. With respect, ma'am, it's not against protocol. Camilla's tone dropped colder. Protocol isn't the issue. Appearances are. A pause. Then her voice again, quieter. That necklace should have stayed buried with its past. Thomas's chest tightened. Buried with its past. So she did know. She remembered. And she wanted it forgotten. The footsteps faded, but those words lingered in the silence long after. Thomas knew he should look away, erase the thought, finish his report, and stay invisible. But something inside him stirred. That old, human instinct that whispers when truth is being hidden. The next day, during the morning inspection, Kate crossed paths with the guards. It was brief, just a corridor lined with uniforms. But as she passed Thomas, she gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Not to the soldier, but to the man. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but he felt it. She knew he'd seen, and maybe, in her quiet way, she trusted that he'd understood. Later that afternoon, a letter circulated privately among senior staff. The Queen's private office had requested a discreet inventory of royal jewelry, a verification of ownership, lineage, and display permission. It was a routine procedure on paper, but Thomas wasn't convinced. It felt like a search. By evening, tension had become thick enough to taste. William was seen in quiet discussion with one of the royal advisors. Camilla skipped dinner, citing headache. The king kept to his study. And in the middle of it all, the necklace, that small, sparkling reminder of a woman gone but never forgotten, had become the storm's eye. Standing guard that night, Thomas found himself stationed near the west staircase, the one leading toward the private family wing. Around midnight, faint voices drifted down the hall. He couldn't see them, but he recognized the tones, Camilla's sharper edge, William's restrained calm. It was my mother's, William said, voice steady but heavy. And if Catherine chooses to honor her, that's her right. Camilla's reply was cold as stone. Your mother made her choices, William. So did the crown. Some memories do more harm than good. There was silence, then footsteps, retreating. Thomas stood motionless. He felt as though he'd stepped into a history book, into a page that no one outside those walls would ever read. For the first time in his career, he felt something he'd never allowed before, sympathy. Not for a title or a position, but for the people beneath them. For Kate's quiet strength, for William's impossible balance, for a family that carried ghosts no one could see. That night, when his shift ended, Thomas walked past the gardens. The moonlight hit the dew like scattered diamonds. He paused, looking back at the castle, the windows glowing softly, secrets flickering behind glass. He thought of the Queen's words, buried with its past. But the past never stays buried. Not when truth glitters like that necklace, waiting to be noticed again. And Thomas, the man sworn to silence, now found himself holding a secret louder than any royal command. The morning sun spilled through the stained glass windows of Windsor Castle, painting colored patterns on the polished floors. To the casual visitor, It was a day like any other, serene, almost mundane. But behind closed doors, the palace hummed with tension, invisible threads pulling at each corner. Thomas, the royal guard, had grown accustomed to noticing details that others overlooked. A sigh that came too late, a door left slightly ajar, a glimmer in the corner of an eye. He had learned that the real story of the palace lived in these details. Whispers and glances, small gestures that spoke louder than proclamations. Today, it was the necklace again. Kate had worn it once more for a private luncheon, this time with senior aides and close family members present. It rested delicately against her gown, catching the light like a memory captured in crystal. But this time, Thomas noticed more than the sparkle. He noticed reactions, subtle shifts in posture, hesitant glances, and a certain tension around Camilla that hadn't been there before. Because the necklace wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a key, a symbol of the past, a reminder of a story that some wanted forgotten and others chose to honor quietly. The story of the necklace traced back decades, far beyond Kate's arrival in the royal family. Its origin was tied to Princess Diana, a figure whose presence still haunted the palace halls. The gem had been part of Diana's personal collection, a gift passed down with care and discretion. It represented not just elegance, but courage, resilience, and a woman's enduring influence. Camilla knew this. William knew this. Kate knew this. And Thomas, standing silently at the edge of the room, began to understand too. He had seen more than anyone else, seen the subtle power plays, the silent battles over memory and legacy. During the luncheon, Camilla made small talk, her tone light but clipped. "It's quite a piece," she said, lifting her fork just enough to maintain eye contact. "Rare, isn't it?" Kate's reply was measured, serene. "Yes, it's a family heirloom. Its story is meaningful to me." And just like that, the hall's energy shifted again. Camilla's smile didn't reach her eyes, and for a fleeting moment, Thomas saw what could only be described as a flicker of unease. Why did this bother her so much? He wondered. Was it the reminder of Diana, the symbol of respect Kate showed? Or perhaps the quiet defiance of a woman who refused to let history be rewritten? The rest of the luncheon passed without incident, but Thomas's mind was anything but calm. After years of observing the palace, he had learned that small details often carried enormous weight. And this necklace, worn with quiet dignity, was doing just that, sending ripples through layers of protocol, pride, and personal history. Later, Thomas found himself in the archives, an area where few guards ever ventured. He wasn't supposed to be there, but curiosity had a way of bending rules. Ancient ledgers, royal correspondence, and faded photographs lined the shelves. He opened one book at random, a record of the palace jewelry collection, and there it was, the necklace catalogued as Gift of Princess Diana, 1995. The notation next to it caught his eye, reserved for future display or ceremonial use. Sensitive history attached. Sensitive history. The words resonated in his mind. This wasn't just about diamonds or gold. This was about stories, personal choices, moments of courage, and the fragile power of memory. Back in the main hall, Camilla was meeting with her advisors, quietly discussing upcoming events and ceremonial duties. But Thomas could sense her calculation, the careful choreography of words, gestures, and timing that masked something deeper. Every interaction with Kate, every glance at the necklace, seemed to weigh on her. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. It was control. The kind of control that comes from being deeply entrenched in an institution, believing you have the authority to shape the narrative. But Kate, and by extension William, challenged that quietly, effortlessly. Later in the afternoon, Thomas overheard a conversation between aides. "The necklace, it's causing quite the stir," one whispered. The Queen noticed, of course. "She doesn't say much, but you can tell. Kate wears it with dignity," another replied. "It's not just jewelry, it's a statement. And William stands by her." Thomas felt a shiver of realization. He had seen power exercised not just through command, but through silence and memory. He had witnessed how a single object could disrupt centuries of protocol, how respect and legacy could clash with ambition and control. And then came the moment that made him understand the stakes completely. Kate, alone for a brief moment in the corridor, touched the necklace lightly. She didn't fiddle with it, didn't adjust it. She simply let her fingers rest against the gem. There was no drama, no display. Yet for those who watched closely, it was a quiet assertion. This is who I am. This is what I honor. And no one could take it from me. Thomas watched from the shadows, heart beating faster than he cared to admit. He realized something fundamental. Sometimes, the most powerful statements weren't made through speeches, decrees, or gestures of authority. They were made through memory, respect, and the quiet courage to uphold what mattered most. By evening, the palace was buzzing with activity once again, but Thomas felt a sense of clarity he hadn't known before. He understood the necklace. He understood Kate. And he understood, in a way that no one else did, the delicate balance of loyalty, duty, and truth that defined the royal family's private world. He also realized that this story, the story beneath the crown, was only beginning. The necklace, small and unassuming to most, had already set events in motion that would ripple far beyond the palace walls. And Thomas, once a silent observer, now found himself holding a knowledge heavier than any sword or key. He had seen the power of memory, the courage of quiet defiance, and the tension between tradition and personal truth. One thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same. The palace was quiet that night, the kind of silence that feels heavy with expectation. Chandeliers reflected a muted light on polished floors, casting shadows that seemed almost alive. Every portrait on the walls, every gilded frame, felt like a witness. And in this quiet, Thomas stood at his post, senses sharpened, knowing that tonight, the walls themselves might speak. He had never imagined a necklace could carry so much weight. Yet, every detail from the last few days, every glance, every hushed word, had led to this moment. And now, the final confrontation was inevitable. Camilla entered the grand hall, heels echoing like distant thunder. Her expression was carefully composed, yet there was a tension in her shoulders, a subtle sharpness in her gaze. She wasn't just confronting Kate. She was confronting the truth that had been quietly unraveling under her very nose. Kate, radiant yet calm, stood by the fireplace, the necklace catching the warm glow of the room. She didn't flinch. She didn't retreat. And in her composure, there was power, quiet, unwavering, undeniable. "Catherine," Camilla began, her voice measured, almost icy. "You wear that piece as though it belongs to you." Kate's smile was gentle, disarming. "It does belong to me, in memory, in respect, and in the promise of carrying a legacy forward." Camilla's eyes narrowed. "You honor the past. Yes, but at what cost?" The tension hung so thick in the air that Thomas felt it pressing against his chest. Every word, every pause was weighted with decades of history, pride, and unspoken emotions. And for the first time, he realized that the guard's role, so often about physical protection, was also about witnessing these delicate truths unfold. Kate stepped forward slightly, her voice calm but unwavering. "The past shapes us, but it doesn't define who we can be. Respecting it doesn't diminish anyone else. It simply acknowledges what came before. That is all I ask." Camilla's expression faltered, a flicker of something raw appearing beneath the surface. It was irritation, yes, but also surprise, the recognition that control could not be claimed through power alone. Kate had reminded the palace, in the subtlest way possible, that legacy and memory could not be forced or hidden. Thomas, standing silently near the staircase, realized something profound. He was witnessing history, the delicate negotiation between authority and truth, between pride and humility. And he understood that some battles were fought not with words, but with quiet courage and moral clarity. Camilla turned, her lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. And then she spoke, softer this time. "Perhaps I underestimated the strength of your conviction." Kate inclined her head slightly. acknowledging the rare concession. "It's not strength," she said softly. "It's respect. That is all any of us can ask of each other." The guard exhaled quietly, almost imperceptibly. He had been trained to notice every nuance, every flicker of emotion, and he now understood why the palace sometimes felt like a stage for invisible drama. Here, behind closed doors, power was not only in the crown, but in the grace, patience, and quiet courage of those who carried truth with them. Later that evening, Thomas witnessed a moment that would stay with him forever. Kate and William moved through the halls, their hands brushing lightly, a shared understanding passing between them. No one else in the palace could see the depth of what had just occurred. But Thomas saw. He understood, and he felt honored to be part of the story, even silently. Camilla, meanwhile, returned to her chambers. Her composure had been restored, but Thomas could sense a shift, subtle, almost imperceptible, but significant. The palace had changed, and so had the dynamics within it. One could maintain power, yes, but truth had a way of carving its own space, and sometimes even the most calculated control could not override it. That night, as Thomas locked the gates and patrolled the quiet corridors, he reflected on what he had seen. A necklace, seemingly small and inconsequential, had revealed the layers of loyalty, respect, and courage that defined a family, a legacy, and a nation. He had seen the true colors of those around him. Not only Camilla, but Kate, William, and the delicate balance that held them all together. In the stillness, he realized that his role as a guard was more than protection. It was witness, it was understanding, it was holding memory in the quietest corners of the palace. And sometimes, that witness bore more weight than any title, any sword, or any crown. As the first light of dawn crept through the castle windows, Thomas stood at the entrance one last time. He watched Kate emerge from her private chambers, the necklace resting against her chest, glinting like a promise kept. She caught his eye and offered a small, knowing smile, a silent acknowledgement that he had seen what mattered. And in that fleeting connection, Thomas felt a profound truth settle in his heart. History is not only recorded in books or portraits. It is carried in quiet courage, in gestures of respect, in moments of grace, in the small acts that ripple far beyond what anyone can see. The palace was still. The world outside carried on. But inside, a story had been written that few would ever know. And Thomas, the guard who had seen too much, would never forget it. Because some legacies are more than titles, crowns, or jewels. They are moments of courage, memory, and truth. Moments that shine like a necklace in the quiet glow of history.